ranking the homunculus in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. The homunculus are essentially, artificial humans or beings created from, artificial humans created from Father, the first homunculus. Now, these homunculus are given names of the seven, deadly sins. And each of them have, abilities that are, powerful. They can recoup themselves as well. They're really good at recouping themselves. And they serve Father so that he can then become like God. That's what they wanted. To serve their Father. That was their, purpose. Kill the humans. Use them for grand transmutation circle, and like make the, they needed sacrifices as well. They needed 5 sacrifices to like transmute the whole, city, and then have Father go into the gate of truth and try to become God. Taking all of the souls of a mistress. It was like it took time for all this too, because they had to like draw like transmutation circles around the whole place. Then they had to get the sacrifices ready. They had to get as many people in a mistress as possible. And then the homunculus also had their own, because like they're each um you know they symbolize an aspect of death, like I said, the 7 deadly sins. But I'm here to rank them, how powerful they are. But the weakest one is lust. Lust, she killed, or had gluttony kill, because she operated with gluttony and envy. She was one of the first ones seen, and she was seen at the church with Leto, and then she forced, or not forced, but envy, talked to the people and was like, give your life to sun god Leto, um, trying to make these people become philosopher's stones. Essentially, he wants them to die and become philosopher's stones. But this girl, right? Let me tell her what her powers is. Lust's powers is she can like stab people and kill people. She killed, Hughes essentially, or like had a role in killing Hughes. She was inside of the library. Hughes was finding things out about the Führer and other people. Being homunculus, and that people in the chain of command knew about this and everything else. But he got killed by lust, but mostly envy killed him. But like I'm saying, this girl's the weakest one. She got she had stabby powers. She was gonna run up on Riza Hawkeye, and guess who? Alphonse Everett. She was ripping them apart or trying to, and then guess who came to save the day? Lust. And he was like, you were there that day when Hughes died, weren't you? And she was like, yes. She had her role to play for Father. Then she got burnt to a crisp by Colonel Mustang. She got hit so fucking much that she lost her recoup abilities. Lust ended up dying to Mustang. I got her as the weakest one, man. I just do. And then I have at number 7, I have Sloth. This guy was in Briggs, in the north. They were like, what is that thing? He's a big, oaf that's running around, moving shit around. And he's like, I have to find Father and, kill these humans, and he's like, he's fast as fuck though, too. Like, he'll be slow as fuck, right? And he's like, he's strong, physically strong, and he's also really quick, and he's like, that's a deceptive act because they think him slow because the name's Sloth, too, and he talks slow and everything else, too. But he can move at ridiculous speeds, and like when he does that, it's so fast that it kills people. Because these are regular ass humans and shit. These aren't, homunculus. He ended up fighting against, the Armstrong twins. And he was doing pretty good against them. He fucked Armstrong's arm up, Miss Armstrong, and then Mr. Armstrong, the brother. He was fighting against him for a little bit. But then they had to jump this man, and he ended up being defeated by, because Azumi Curtis came to save the day against this guy. But he's at number 7. At number 6 is Gluttony. Now, Gluttony is one who ate people. He ate the guy who was using a philosopher's stone in Leto, right? Or in the church. He was a church guy, and he was like, give your life to Leto and other things. I perform miracles. I'm a miracle worker, and it's because of this God, right? But he's using a philosopher's stone to, perform miracles and create things and other things, right? And he was tricking people. I can perform miracles and all this. But then, guess who ate him? It was Gluttony who ate him. And Gluttony ate a whole bunch of other people too. And he, had this move where he could like absorb people too. He absorbed Ed, Ling, and Envy. And he was like, I ate Envy. I'm trying to, get back to, get her back and other things because that's an ally. He's kind of not smart, but he asks, permission to eat people, and they say yes or no. You can't kill the Alpha and Elric brothers. They're needed for the sacrifice. And he's like, oh man, and then he's like, well, I can eat these people, right? And then he's like, yes. And then he starts devouring people. And he can eat anybody, except his brother. And that's the thing. He found his brother Pride, and Pride ended up eating him. Because he has more malice and other things. He's just more powerful than he is, and not as dumb and other things. But Gluttony was a problem, for a little bit. He was like shooting out like wind projectiles and like killing shit. When he has that big mouth, he's like boom, and it erases like a whole bunch of like area. Basically he's consuming all that. But then when he closes his mouth and he goes back to his regular form, he's just a dumbass running around. And heeding calls to his fellow homunculus. But he's number 6. And at number 5, I have Envy. Envy was a dangerous one, and this is why Envy was dangerous, because Envy had the ability to transform into other people, appearances and everything. Not memories really, but appearances. And he transformed into that one sergeant girl, and before she killed Hughes, she turned into his wife, and then Hughes was like, wait, and then he ended up getting shot. She was fucking with his head before he died, or he was. This guy's all fucked up. Envy, because he's envious of humans too. The bonds that they share with each other and other things, and he likes to like make people hate each other. He likes to like keep chaos, amongst people. He gets happy when, people hate one another and want to kill each other and other things. Don't you hate this person for doing this to you and this? Scar, don't you want to get revenge on, people in Amestris who, ran, through your people and killed your people? Don't you want to get revenge on Scar because he, had a hand in killing your girl's, family? Don't you want to, kill, this person because of this, and that, and that was towards the end of his days. But he also had a form where he could like turn into like the bodies of like the people who were in Xerxes and all these other people. Their souls and their like, words were still like reaching, people. He could like summon them in a way, like manifest their, like I would say manifesting their bodies forward, in like a big monster thing. He was like this green monster, and then like these heads would come out. And Edward Elric, when they were inside of Gluttony, was hearing these voices and was like, damn, these people are real people. And then he's like, no, they've done died and shit. So, Ling was like, you got to get back, and we got to get back to the real world. He ended up getting back to the real world. He was, Envy was there, and he was running around for a while. But then he found out, or Mustang found out that he was the one who killed, was the one who actually killed May Hughes, and he was pissed. He was like, I'm going to get revenge on this animal, and that was when, Lust started, after he got turned into the little bug, He was like, guess what? You want to kill me, don't you? I like to sow hatred in the hearts of men and, make them want to, kill one another. He gets enjoyment from that. He doesn't like when they come together and they, to fight against real evil and shit. But he started crying and shit like a bitch after it was all over. But, he ended up dying too, just like the rest of them. But he was at number 5 because he was like playing games with people, placing deceptive acts, changing into other people. It was a dangerous move. And then he had that big form too. But like, I still think the people above him can defeat him. Like Greed. Greed was a guy who, he's greed of avaricious. So he needs all the money, all the bitches, and everything this world has to offer. He had a group of people with him. The first iteration of greed, the first greed that was shown to us, right? And he was like, okay, I'm a homunculus. You can try to, kill me or anything, and, I'll just recoup myself. But like this body is, not immortal like that. Like I still need to eat another thing. I want that kind of body. I want one where I don't have to eat, I don't have to do anything, I don't have to, use the restroom or anything. That's like, this is like a semi kind of immortal body, but I want to be immortal forever so I can make money and, chase women and, not chase them, but have them. And he's like, I need that, He ended up fighting against Edward Elric, and Edward Elric, fought against him, but then he was chased down by none other than Fuhrer Bradley. Fuhrer Bradley ended up killing him, or almost killing him. He caught him and then took him back to father. And he was like, you rebel against your own father, Greed. And he's like, yeah, of course I would, because I need everything. It's me. I'm the one who needs all of it. You can't hate me for, being this way. My name's Greed. He was boiled, and then like his soul was then, recouped into another greed, and that greed was used to, and the host of this greed was Ling, the leader of the other land, Shing, I think is the capital, or the other land, west of Metris, or no, east of Metris, and he took over Ling's body. And he forgot that he had a group of people around him at one point, and he was going to take over, the world and whatnot, because he's greedy, avaricious, so he has to have everything. And then he was like, he was working for father for a little bit, then he started remembering his friends and other things, and he was like, damn, I need to get back on that shit. I need to stay away from them and, do my own thing like I was doing. I hate those fuckers for killing me and then, not having me to have to be recouped again. He then ran shit on. He was running around with the Elric brothers for a little bit, and he fought against Fuhrer Bradley when he came to Amestris. But he didn't fight him by himself. He was trying to. He was like, I'm going to get revenge on you for what you did to me last time. He ended up ripping through his eye a little bit, fucking his eye up. That's the best thing he did to Wrath. But his body was like an ultimate shield, so he was able to cut through other Amestris officers who were still in support of the Fuhrer, and he was able to cut them down. He had a, face turn, I guess, or he became a good guy, right? So guess what? He was helping the Alphonse brothers at the end of the series fight against father. He was like, he's gonna take my soul back into him, but I'm gonna fuck things up on the inside. And then, he was like, I always wanted friends, so I have to fight for my friends, as a last thing, to show that he was actually one of the better homunculus. He was probably the good guy out of all of them. He was actually, but yeah, he was a good guy at the end of the day, and he is more powerful than the other ones below him. I just think he could rip through shit. He can fuck shit up pretty good. He's not the best skilled fighter though, because guess what? I got at number 3, King Fuhrer Bradley himself. So Fuhrer Bradley became a homunculus. First he was a human, right? And then, there was I think 11 or 12 test subjects, and their bodies, rejected the homunculus, transfer. They needed Wrath to become the viewer of a mattress and then lead, you know, the people. Lead the people so that they could then create things for Father, the sacrifices, so then he could become God. And Fuhrer Bradley was like one of those key stone pieces. He ended up becoming a homunculus. And he was a great fighter too, with the swords. He's a great swordsman too. I actually forgot about that. But Fuhrer Bradley killed Greed, the first generation of Greed. Then he fought against Greed again, but he also fought against, Fu, and he fought against Fu, Ling, and he fought against a lot of people, and he survived all those encounters. He killed Fu and he killed Captain Buccaneer. He fought against a tank. He had a tank going backwards. He sent the tank going backwards by himself. They were, afraid of him, and they were like, he's going to cut us down. They that tank had a Fu in reverse real quick, like, boom. This guy's going to cut us down. He still did. He still got through that to them, and he killed the people inside the tank, and then he was fighting against everybody else too. That being Greed and, Fu and Buccaneer, and he killed Buccaneer and Fu. He couldn't quite kill Greed though the second time, but he then was below a mistress, and he was fighting against Scar, and that's when he ended up losing. Scar barely won that. But Fuhrer Bradley was a fucking issue for the good guys. He was a fucking problem. I have him at number 3 because at number 2 I have Pride. I was thinking about putting Fuhrer Bradley above Pride, but then I was like, guess what? Pride is basically his father. He's the same as his father. His father's, pride and joy, essentially. Even Hohenheim stated that, because he remembered, father when he was the Dwarf in the Flask. And that's who, Pride looks when he's using his abilities. These shadows, these eyes that could see things. But he can also attack with these shadows. Stabby stab, kind of like Lust. But then he can also use Mouse like his brother, Gluttony. And then he's smart like Fuhrer Bradley. He kind of, I don't want to say he has the abilities of all the other ones, but it's like almost like that is what I'm saying. He ate Gluttony. He, fought against Edward Elric and the Chimeras. Almost killed one of the Chimeras. He ate Kimberly too. After he was like useless, he deemed him useless, so he ate him. And he was Selim Bradley. That's who his undercover name was. Him and Wrath were undercover as the leaders of, or not, well, basically the leaders, but the family of a mattress that was in charge. But then Pride was defeated by Edward Elric after being absorbed. Kimberly was inside of him, and he was like, yeah, you were prideful in being a homunculus, but then you want to hop into Edward Elric's body and become a human. That don't make any sense. You want to, change who you are. You're not that prideful about who you are. Of course I wanted this guy to win, because you ain't being prideful enough. Your name is Pride, but you ain't prideful about who you are. You have no pride in it. So he's like, oh shit. He ended up dying. He ended up losing his life. And then there was a baby that came from it, which was I guess the real body or the fake human or whatever. But they had to watch him and other things after everything was said and done. We don't never know what happened with that, but I guess the kid grew up to be good or whatever. But Pride was the second most powerful because his father was the most powerful. He created all the other homunculus. That's all I have to say about that. if he created all the other homunculus, he has to be the most powerful. You know, he could also absorb the other one. You know, he absorbed greed into his body, but he was trying to absorb greed to him as well. So he, and that was towards the end, but he first appeared because he was a dwarf in the flask. He's like, I want to get out of here. I want to, and he basically wants to become like God, but he's like, I don't want to be just this thing that knows things, but like can't do shit with the knowledge I know. You know, I want to become a perfect being. You know, walk on 2 feet and everything else. So then we use the people of Xerxes to, you know, create, you know, his body. You know, half of the souls were inside of him, and then the other half were inside of Owenai. And they could then, like, they lived forever, you know. They were essentially immortals and shit, but not perfect. And he was like, I'm not perfect yet. I created the homunculus. You know, they will, you know, go on their way, and they'll, you know, he calls to, you know, creating this, you know, giant, you know, circle, just like in Xerxes, but, you know, not quite, because this time I'm going to, you know, become like God. And that was his plan. You know, he did that, you know, he was able to like create a like small like sun as he called it, you know, and he was gonna like kill people with it. But then, you know, Hohenheim was like, well, guess what? I had, you know, because Hohenheim knew about, you know, father's plan. You know, it took like basically it took the efforts of everybody. Hohenheim, you know, his sons Edward and Alphonse Elric, you know, the Armstrongs, and everybody in the Metrics that was against the homunculus. You know, which was basically everybody after, you know, father, you know, his offspring were defeated, except Greed, and Greed actually turned against his father too. You know, and they fought against father. Father was the final boss, you know, of the series. You know, he could have defeated any of his children at any point in time. He could have died with him. And, you know, he didn't really like have to do all that. I don't think. But he needed those bodies to like walk around. He wasn't trying to be seen by many. You know, because Hohenheim was already out in the shoot, and he looked like Hohenheim. But he tried to obtain power of God, and he got close to doing it. Yeah, you know, Edward Elric ended up, you know, stopping with the Zuni Kurdish and everybody else. You know, it took the combined efforts of everyone to stop this guy. You know, Fuhrer Bradley and, you know, Pride, and, you know, they're kind of the same way, you know, combined efforts to fight them, but everyone had to fight against this guy, or else they were all going to die. Like, literally everyone that was still alive. But that's the ranking of the homunculus as told by Darius Green Angel. You know, let me know who you think is the most powerful and other things, but watch FMAB. You know, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, not the Full Metal Alchemist, because that's not, you know, canonized material. You know, we like canonized material over here. You know, that's basically, you know, some shit you don't want to watch. But Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, that shit's good. You know, you gotta watch it. Be cool, calm,